Okay, so we are going to get rocking. So bear with me. I am just gonna. This is a handout. I'm gonna post it to D2L later today. We're gonna touch on it a little bit, but it's really meant to. Math. It's hard sometimes. 6 is not 7. It's a weird. It's a odd thing. It's a really. It's an exercise in difficulty sometimes. But this is meant to support you guys with kind of the information literacy assignments, but also just any sort of analytical process in general. It has some really good steps involved that should hopefully help you guys out. Okay, so while we are doing that, I just wanted to say that I made a small scale post to D2L on the announcements page. I don't really know, and this is something I should have asked you guys, is there a preference on kind of where I'm communicating to you? Because it's like, it would be very easy to like inundate people with emails, and I have no desire to do that because I understand that you guys all have plenty of other pieces going on. So my goal, I guess, would say, like, I'm trying to be rather intentional in the sense that I spend some time kind of paying attention to what you guys are asking, obviously, through the week. And then kind of by the time the weekend hits, and obviously we have deadlines on Sundays by and large. So kind of supporting you guys through that and then being reflective on those pieces. I'm thinking of posting kind of a general quick hits on Monday to the course D2L page. And unless something operationally critical comes up, you know, we can touch base in class or in a variety of other things. Does that sound good? Does that work for people? Okay. So the post that I had on D2L today was just kind of focusing some of the stuff for the week. I would say people did really well with the discussion posts. And admittedly, it was a little bit targeted at trying to get people, you know, comfortable and everything else. So going forward, it's obviously going to be a little bit different in the sense that there really isn't a but why about yourself. like I wasn't really asking you to be deeply critically thinking about what your favorite hobby was or something else. I mean, that would be a little bit silly. So it's not meant to be a strenuous exercise, I would say, but it is meant to be something that you demonstrate some amount of thinking to support you guys. What my plan is at the start of the week. So I didn't do it this morning, but by the end of day today, I will have a post that is similar in scope and format from what I am expecting from you guys, but on the previous week stuff. So it should give you guys a very good, a very good line of sight of kind of what you should be doing or thinking without being something that is me doing the work for you guys. So hopefully that is helpful. I'm open to feedback off of that as need be. Does that make sense? Any questions on that? Good, bad? Okay, so one thing that is, so one of your classmates, Austin, is under the weather. Sorry, Austin. But he had reached out to me and just asked if I was going to be streaming the lecture or just recording it. And I was like, well, I guess I could stream it. I mean, like, I'm recording it through Zoom, so there's nothing that said. I mean, like, functionally, all of the pieces are there. I just hadn't had the intention of doing that. So, so he has joined remotely. So I'm going to get some feedback from him about whether or not he was able to understand things and everything from a remote setting. And if that's the case, I'll probably set it up where they can be joined remotely going forward. I don't see any reason why not. What I will say is that was kind of the intention of what we had done in the global classroom before. And we rarely, I mean, like we had like, let's see, we had 200 to 250 students each term, and we probably had like 5 that would attend, you know, like 5 a week that would attend remotely. So it wasn't something that people were using a lot. But then, and actually it's interesting because this topic kind of touches on the class, which is, were people not doing it a lot because that was the only class that did it, and therefore students weren't thinking that it was even an option, right? So it's like they hadn't incorporated it into their workflow. So why would they, right? Why would they expect that? So anyway, so hopefully things go well for Austin, both in a health sort of sense and in a lecture sort of sense. And then assuming it's functional, then, and I don't see why it wouldn't be, but I'll set up reoccurring links that'll be the same link, and then I'll post them to the course D2L page. So if someone has something come up, or if they really just want to stay in their PJs, you know, I mean, or you can come to class in your PJs as long as it's, you know, somewhat appropriate. Okay, so today is where we really transition and start moving towards, I think this is building the foundation of so many crucial parts of this class. So if we don't have a good understanding of data, information, knowledge, the difference between those, and how they are utilized to support decision making, you're going to be way behind. But what we build with this is going to support even the idea of what goes into databases. It's going to support kind of any part of analysis that's a data or fact-based analysis, as well as data visualization. So this touches on a variety of pieces of this class, and absolutely is impactful in everyone's professional career. So this is definitely very important. There's a good amount to cover, but please feel free to ask questions. One of the other things that's nice about this class format is, because we do have that Wednesday lecture, if there are a lot of questions on a topic for me to clarify and everything else, we can push any amount of this content to Wednesday. So I would much rather have everyone walk outside of the doors of this class today feeling very confident in what was covered, and not be quiet because there is a lot to cover, if that makes sense. So just as a kind of pre-frame. So agenda. So we're going to debrief from week 1 real quick. Expectations, which thank you all for kind of giving me the expectations of me. I do take those very seriously, because I want to deliver to you guys what you need to the best of my ability. Brief SimNet check-in, discussion post update, which I kind of hit while we were getting things set. Learning objectives, analytical thinking, lecture, wrap up, questions, and a wonderful Monday, I think. These are the goals for today. So first and foremost, so I kind of aggregated the expectations of what everyone had. So most of the classes, actually, most of the 3 sections were pretty well consistent, which is good, right? It makes my life easier that I don't have to try to be fully schizophrenic between all 3 courses. And I would certainly say that these are a lot of things that were valuable to me when I was a student. But just so I make sure that everyone hears what I was receiving and what I am going to be putting my effort forth on. So timely responses, I would hope that I have been meeting the needs on that so far. I am very committed to responding to email within 24 hours. Most discussion posts that any student had in any of the sections, I have responded to at this point, and will have responded to all of them by end of day today. I can't say that I will respond to each and every post, because I have over 150 students every week, but I will do my best to be active and 100% reading them and posting and supporting, full stop. Additionally, any of the general discussions where people, reach out or anything else, I'm also actively monitoring that. So hopefully that is meeting your needs. But also, if it's not, let me know. Clear communication. I will try. I certainly had a couple of students say that they were a bit confused with some of the topics covered, and I think sometimes my enthusiasm can get the best of me. And also, I recognize that there is a lot to cover in this class, and I want to get you guys as much value as possible, right? My perspective is I literally would look at something and basically say, okay, so I'm paying $1,000 for this class. How do I get $1,000 of value out of this class, right? Having over 20 years of experience and a professional experience before I took something like BA 320 or BA 205, I was like, cool, so how am I gonna get value from this class? Or the thorn in my side, which was COM 220, which don't even get me started on that class and the fact that I paid $1,000 for that class. But needless to say, so how do you gain value from that, right? And if I'm trying to guide you guys along that, certainly knowing that I can just try to maybe run too fast. And so I definitely am trying to gauge the room and everything else. That's why I really do appreciate when you guys ask questions, and I'm going to try to push you guys to do that, because I am willing and hopefully able to adjust the communication. You guys just got to let me know. So, but I am trying to be mindful of that. Clear expectations, hopefully that is where we're at, I hope. And certainly I can revisit any of the pieces. I would say that the information literacy assignments are probably the only things that I can't give completely concrete expectations around, and that's because they are open-ended by design. So I can give you a good amount, and I'm not trying to hedge, but I'm just saying, like, I can give a good amount, but I can't do every last piece, because my expectation would be that every single student is going to deliver a slightly different perspective and a slightly different line of sight because the assignments are open-ended. So, but I'm still willing to try, so please ask questions. The one piece that I would say is where you do have questions, please try to be proactive. I believe I said that quite a bit when people were mentioning that that was something that's important to them, but there's not a lot I can do to help you out if I'm getting an email on, Sunday at 5 p.m. Especially if you're like, I want to start the data exhaust assignment now. And my answer is going to be, do you have a time machine? And probably not, then it's not going to go so well, right? So just being proactive, that's the best way that I can work with you guys. Supportive, I want every single person to succeed in this class. My goal would be that every person would get the best possible grade commensurate with their effort. And obviously in any class, effort is going to be a driver. So that's there. But fair grading, I will be very clear in what my grading is. And any time that we have issues, because I know SimNet will be something that comes up, and that's just real. But where I think there was 2 or 3 questions that different students had in this section, but also some other sections about grading related pieces. And if you give me the information about what question it is, what you did, why you think what you did was correct and you got something wrong, I will 100% look into it. If I feel like it was misleading or a system-driven thing, I will 100% revisit the question with you. So I will try to be as fair as possible. I actually have a bit of a fairness complex. So if I'm ever not being fair, please call me out. And I'm happy to explain myself, because I will never do something in this class that I don't believe is fair. That being said, I am totally willing to listen to your guys' perspective. So if I'm doing something and Yelena's like, that is a jackass thing and that is not fair, like, we can talk about it, and I'm totally open to the idea that maybe she's right and I hadn't considered something, and I'll be like, oh, what a jerk. I should probably fix that. So like, I'm human too, but so I am happy to have a dialogue about it. I'd like for it to be positive, helpful and genuine. Hopefully, it's always weird when that happens. Helpful and genuine, hopefully that's a thing that I am doing so far. And again, on any of these pieces, if I'm not doing it, let me know. I am happy to adjust. Professionally helpful information. So that's, am I giving you information that then you can take and isn't just like in a textbook somewhere and it's like a novelty or something else, but am I delivering something to you that, as I said in the first week, is either, let's say, resume worthy or something that's going to support your decision making, your thought process in a professional setting. And I hope that every lecture there will be something like that for at least some of you. Obviously, some of the topics maybe won't be as relevant to some of you professionally, but I would venture to say that pretty much all of them are because of how integrated technology is in business. And then memes, which are absolutely a part of my life. So I didn't even realize about like the whole White Claw thing. I was talking to my girlfriend and she's like, oh yeah, it's a thing. And then I looked and she has like 10 cases of it. And I was like, oh, when you said it's a thing, you meant it's our thing, or at least adjacent. So anyways, but that dog looks like he or she has just had a real good sort of time. So expectation of students, just real quick. So check the weekly course content. Pretty self-explanatory, but we have to be professionals. Use the posted resources. So for me, what I'm talking about there is, I'm not saying that everyone, needs to watch every single video or everything else. I mean, I think they're valuable, but I am not going to micromanage people. But what I am saying is, if you do have a question about SimNet and you have not watched the SimNet guide, and then you don't watch the SimNet guide, I mean, let's be professionals here. If there are clearly resources there to support you, please at least try to look into those before you send me an email or something else. Like, I'm happy to help, but we have to act like adults to some degree. The communication expectations. Most of the people have been really, really good about the kind of 3 before me idea. And the biggest piece there is I'm just, again, trying to push you guys to use your resources. There are a lot of things that are, will be questions that come up, but they'll be questions that come up in a professional situation or something else. And there are resources that are available. I mean, Google, I literally Google everything. If I was to do an off the grid thing and just not allow myself, I think I would go completely crazy. Like I didn't even realize how often I Google things. Also, as a side note, I'm a terrible speller. And so thank God for things like Grammarly and Google, because they recognize that I apparently don't even know my own language. And so the reality is, like, I will Google the stupidest thing in the world just because I'm like, oh yeah, how do I spell that? Yeah, sure. So there are resources that we all have available. The SimNet piece is, I didn't touch on in the syllabus, and that might have been my bad. But it is there in the syllabus. And all it really says is, and I kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, is if you think SimNet was wrong, please tell me why. Like, just tell me this is what you did and this is why you think it was correct, right? And screenshots really help me too, because sometimes I actually do have to go into the details. And actually a student visited me in my office hours today, and I kind of walked through with them what the process looks like. But I can kind of simulate any question and go and then see, like, oh, okay, so this is what Samvel did in this question. Great. And then I can go and see, like, what was the actual interface that you guys were presented with? Okay. And then what would I do? And then how is it communicating to us what is right or wrong? And does that make sense? And there are plenty of times where if I think that it's not fair and kind of what Samvel has done shows that he has a good understanding of what's going on, I'm happy to, give credit to that question. The problem is that if all you say is this was wrong, like, I have to turn into a detective, and I probably am not going to answer that question till the end of the day, just because I recognize by the way that question is communicated to me, it is a 15-minute thing that I have to look into. And I just often don't have that time through the day. So if you guys are following that, I can support you guys faster. And then proactive communication. I don't mean to bang the same drum. And then, seriously, look at this dog in a lab coat. Look at it. Like, this person apparently has a service dog, and apparently in labs, service dogs need to wear lab coats and lab protection equipment too. And like, I still have my lab coat from when I was a scientist, and like, I have a dog, and it never would have occurred to me. Like, this is just I just don't even know. There's nothing better than that. So, placeholder, reminder to me. Okay, so real quick. So the only piece that I had there for, so this is, I'll zoom it out slightly. I hate how it transitions on this screen to being so zoomed in. So each week I have the, kind of top end piece that shows kind of what we're covering this week. And so it has learning objectives, it has some other pieces, and it has the SimNet content focus. So this shows kind of a breakdown of what different things you're going to see in the SimPath 2 and kind of what content is covered, and in the SimPath 3 and what content is covered. That's similar to before. That should not be any surprise. That's just me trying to support you guys so you know what you're going to encounter, so you guys have a kind of good idea ahead of time. Great. This added piece here is with the projects. And so with the projects, I'm giving a little bit more detail of what those given projects cover, so that way you guys know what skills you'll be practicing in the scope of doing those projects. So again, that's just there to kind of support you guys a little bit. Covered in the SimNet video, but best practice for the projects is to print out the PDF of the instructions. I hate saying that because then you're, killing a tree or whatever else, but there were numerous times that I missed like half a point here or there, literally because I only partially read a sentence. Like it was like I read almost all of the sentence, and then at the very end it was like, oh, and change this to font size 14, right? I did everything else except for the font size 14, and then I would get like a quarter of a point down, and like somehow getting a quarter of a point off out of 34, which is clearly not like grade impactful, it's like a thorn in your side. It's like that much worse. So I am a big believer, and one thing that when I was going through it, I started doing was I would print out the instructions, the PDF of the instructions, and I would like accountant style one line through when I had done the full line, and then kind of move on. And then that enabled me to not miss stupid crap, right? And like, to me, the thing is frustrating is like I said last week, like if I don't know it and I miss it, so be it, then hopefully I'll learn. But like if I know it and I miss it and it's just annoying, that's just frustrating to me. So that's a way to kind of mitigate some of that frustration. The guided projects are what I would say very handholdy. They are literally click-by-click instructions on what to do. So it is quite download a starter file, have the instructions, and be very detailed and follow what they say, and you should get very close to a perfect score unless you missed a thing, right? And you have 2 submissions, so if you don't get a perfect score, you can look at the feedback they give you, and you can go back to your file and adjust it. The guided projects are, or I'm sorry, the independent projects, are a little bit less hand-holdy, but still have a good amount of guardrails. Have people done, in the SimPaths, have people done some of the lessons? Yeah, some? Okay, so I would say the guided projects are similar to the, show me. Sorry, I was trying to remember the terminology. So I'd say the guided projects are very similar to the show me, in the sense that they are giving you literally every step to get from A to B. And I would say the independent projects are similar to somewhere between the guide me and let me try. Probably closer to the guide me, which is that middle piece where you're still getting a good amount of hand-holding. All of that being said, I do not want to give you guys a false sense of things. The biggest, like what I would say, time waster where people will get frustrated with the projects is when they aren't very detail-oriented. So again, this is one of those pieces where when people wait to the last minute, like you're in a hurry. I don't know any human that can be detail-oriented when they're in a hurry, like just by its very nature. And so with the projects, when you're going to do it, make sure you're in a place where you're not going to be disturbed. You can just sit down and you can do it. And I highly recommend setting aside like 2 hours and doing both, right? Because they are very interrelated in how you'll do stuff. So I was able to, you know, kind of mitigate some of my time of getting back in the groove by doing whatever the pairing was. So the guided project and the independent project, and doing that at the same time. And that was really, really beneficial to me. So that would be my recommendation. You don't have to, but any questions on that? Carter, it looked like you had a question. Oh, okay. Okay, cool. Cool. I was like, okay. But any other non-Carter questions? No? Okay. Good, good. So, cool. So, do we want to? Yeah. Okay. So there was awesome participation. Everyone that participated is going to get full credit. Those of you that had multiple posts will probably get extra credit. I will have all of those grade posts posted today because timely feedback and timely things are very valuable to you guys. That is a thing. Going forward, as was talked about in the syllabus and in the D2L announcement post today, 2 questions. What course content is currently challenging or frustrating to you? And what have you done to resolve it? What course content this week was specifically interesting to you and why? So again, just so we have fully clear communication, the and why is much more relevant to me than the first part, because the and why shows me that you're thinking about it. So just so we're perfectly clear, the and why is the piece that's going to be a crucial part of me evaluating whether or not you, Gesundheit, you understand and you are demonstrating thought. And you should be able to be like, the guided projects are super frustrating because it's so detailed, you know, and I keep missing stupid points or whatever else. And this is what I've done to try to do it. You know, the first submission, I only got 50%, but I wasn't paying attention. So I went back, I looked at the feedback, I looked at the instructions, I did all of this, so on and so forth. You should be able to tell that story in 3 sentences, maybe 4. So I'm not expecting a paragraph. I'm not expecting multiple paragraphs or anything else. It really shouldn't take that long, hopefully. So that's that one. And then kind of, like I said, sentences show thought. And I'm going to post an example each week that relates to the previous week, as I said. Hopefully that sets you guys up and supports you. Feel free to ask questions on me from that. Also, the one thing that I'm wondering is, where would you guys like me to post that? I realize that sounds weird, but you guys don't have visibility on the discussion post until you've posted yourself. So should I put my post like in the discussion post description? Would that be helpful? Should I put it in the announcements? I don't really care. I just want you guys to be able to see it before you're doing your post. Does that make sense? In the post, like in the description of the post, so like week 2, blah, and then my post. Cool. I just didn't want to clutter up the page too much. I'm comfortable either way. So I will do that today. I will make sure mine is there so you guys can see it. So, and then you can go in and when you're doing yours. Cool. Thank you, Megan. Awesome. So learning objectives for today. So we're going to think critically about information technology issues, substantiate the opinion. Awesome. We're going to link specific information system terminology. Terminology, there's some very foundational terminology that we're going to cover today. And then critically analyze IS trends. And so we're not really going to touch on Excel and Access today. I would say based on what I described last week, that's going to be more of the scope of our Wednesday sort of class. So I'm going to try to hit more comprehensive and broad lecture topics on Mondays. And then again, so probably 4 and 5 are going to link there. We'll get to the data model when we get to databases, which will be week 4 through, I think week 4 through week 6. So that's kind of our agenda for today. Any questions? Any comments, concerns? Okay. Okay, so I handed out the analytical thinking document. So this is something that I made a while ago, and it actually, its roots are in the kind of the question that I found was very frustrating to students is classes would say, we want to teach you critical thinking skills, or we want to teach you analytical thinking. But that was the extent of it. Like they would say that that's what they wanted to do, and then you would do an assignment that was potentially supposed to teach you analytical thinking, but then you'd get graded down if you weren't analytically thinking, but then you would get graded down because you weren't analytically thinking, and somewhere in between it was not demonstrated how to get there. Like, and so it was this piece that I felt like was a very real gap. And also, as a major piece of this, I found that when I was doing a couple of really, really major reports, like I did this major research report into Nike. And so I was doing this report, and you had to like kind of look at a major problem of a company and kind of research it and then come up with solutions and all these other pieces. Okay, so that's something that we've all kind of done in some way, shape, or form. And I think the paper ended up being like, I think it was like 100 pages with references and stuff. So it was like, it was a very large sort of ordeal. But what I found was my first question that I was thinking about looking into was not the most relevant question. And that is often what I find a barrier with a lot of students, right? Like you start with a question and then you're just like, I'm gonna run down this hallway and not consider anything else, any different direction. And then like at the end of it, if you're self-reflective, you might just be like, I have other questions now or something else. But you don't have the time, you don't have the bandwidth to actually answer them, right? And so in a professional setting, that's not so great. And sometimes time is a factor, and that's just life. But so this was sort of meant to give you guys a good kind of template of what you can do in really any situation that might require analysis. And I would say this is a very, very good tool to use in at least 3 of the information literacy assignments. The ones that you'll work on this week, the Excel analysis, definitely, and the data model as well. The pivot table one and the database one actually are more skill building than kind of thinking outside of the box, but they do have some elements involved. So just kind of starting it off, so preparation. So determine what situation you're looking into and kind of gather your resources. So I'm going to try to link this process to the information literacy assignments that you guys will be working on this week. That is not to say that it only applies there. And I'm not going to go in too much depth today on the information literacy assignments because we will have plenty of time to cover it on Wednesday. So I just want to make sure that I'm level setting that. But so preparation is determining what situation you're looking into. So have we at least looked at the 2 information literacy assignments to see what one we're interested in? Maybe, yeah, getting some nod. There's no judgment. No, you got almost a week. So I'm not. The one thing that I would say is try to look into it today, just because if you choose to do the data exhaust, it takes 48 hours just to do the, call it data collection side of it. And so if you wait to the last minute, even if that's the one you want to do, then you have to do the other one. Now, again, no judgment either way, but just that's a piece. I would say both of these information literacy assignments require a little bit of logistics because you're either going off the grid or you're gathering stuff from some of your friends. And we all have friends that are super responsible, and we also have friends that are super flaky. And wrangling flaky people, it's a thing. So, but determining what situation you're looking into. So you're going to do the Google search or you're going to do the data exhaust. I don't particularly care, but look at the assignments, see which ones are interesting to you. In this case, you have a choice. But determine which of the assignments you're going to do and determine what you're looking into. So what is the scope of the assignment, right? What are you going about doing? And then gather your resources. So for the Google search assignment, one of your resources would be the filter bubble video, which is posted in this week's D2L and kind of gives a little bit of background of what this concept is and what it relates to. The data exhaust assignment, probably your resources would be today's lecture, because we're going to touch on some of the terms that are involved in that. But I would say, but just know what your resources are, know what the background elements are, know what those pieces are that you possibly need so you have them. So identify the questions. So in an analytical situation, it might be like, what the hell am I looking into? Or what question has my boss asked me? Or why do they care? Things like that. For this assignment and the other very critically thinking oriented information literacy assignments, I would challenge you, and this is going to help you accomplish the assignments, is not to think about like, so I have told you, go off the grid, you're going to go off the grid this way, and so on and so forth. More importantly for this, when you specify the question, is why am I going off the grid? Like what are we supposed to accomplish by doing it, right? And that's going to give you a better line of sight of kind of what the situation is, how you need to be thinking. Same thing with the Google search. Why am I even demonstrating this? The Google search can be a little bit easier to answer that question initially, just because it's linked to the filter bubble video. So you have some pretty good resources that support kind of the point of doing it. But still, that's a very valuable question of like, what am I doing and what am I trying to accomplish? Why am I doing it? So kind of that sort of piece. And being able to say it in one sentence. Do you have a question or just arm shy? No, I don't mean to be question gun shy over here, but I don't get many. So when I think I might have one, I'm just like a dog when someone gets home. I'm just like, oh, a question? Define the criteria by which you're evaluating the question. Now that's really, really important. So sometimes your boss or someone else is defining the criteria, right? But other times, and this is more common, I find, they just say, answer the question. And they don't necessarily give you all of the parameters that might go into it. Like if you recall last week, I was using the example of tell me who our worst supplier is right now. Okay. Yelena just beating me down, wanting the worst supplier. Okay. So we could have in the moment right now, the worst supplier with maybe the longest lead time until we get a product delivered could be our actual best supplier for the last 5 years, and there could have been something that was disruptive to them, right? So if I, in a very literal sense, looked on a micro level of this month and using only time as a criteria, it would be this one entity. And perhaps if I used other criteria in answering the question, I might have a different answer. Now, I'm not saying one situation is right or wrong, but what is important is you know what criteria you used and you declare it, right? Because if I go to Yelena and I'm like, okay, this one company is terrible, and then she's like, well, why? Right? Because she's not just gonna go and not have a relationship with a vendor that she's had, like that the company has had for 10 years, just because some idiot was like, yeah, they're bad this month. That's not how the world works, right? And so it's one of those things where she's gonna ask the follow-up question of like, oh, okay, why? Like, what was your criteria? And if I go and say, well, they were really late this month, objectively, that's not wrong, and that is important. But if she, as my boss, is like, okay, that's important, but also these other 4 things are important to her, now I perhaps need to go back and reevaluate the process that I did. But if I can't declare what my criteria was, she loses complete faith in the work that I did, right? So you need to know what you're looking into, and then you need to know what your evaluation criteria is, because otherwise it calls into question all of the work that you created. And then also, this one's very important, but you want to be cautious with it, so just bear with me. So what do you expect to see? That is really important when you're going into any open-ended or critical thinking sort of exercise. But you also don't want to be attached to that as the answer. So in science, you need to be very careful with hypothesis testing, because what you actually do is the only way to prove your expectation is to definitively prove that the counter is not occurring. So you assume that you're wrong, and then you have to prove it, right? It's kind of the very, very broad and sort of general thing. And that's a really important thing, because it's easy. If you expect to see one thing, you will find it. And that's something you want to avoid. So it is important that you go into any experiment or any assignment having an idea of like, okay, I'm going to go off the grid. I'm going to go off the grid in these ways. What do I expect to see from that? Hopefully you're thoughtful and you've decided like, I'm going to go off the grid in these ways for a specific reason, right? Perhaps it's something that you do very often, or perhaps it's something that you want to see if you can. I don't particularly care about what the reason is, but hopefully there is some thought as to why you are doing it. And then as a kind of comma splice off of that going into this, what do you expect to get from that, right? If I was to completely remove my ability to Google search things, and if I was to cut Grammarly off from my phone and other things, you guys would get some very poorly constructed emails. I'm just going to put it out there. Also, I love commas. It's the thing. And my friend is always like editing my stuff, and she's like, there are 8 too many commas in this one paragraph. And like, you literally might have a comma after every word if I had my druthers. So, but I mean, like, that might be a thing that would be novel to say. Like, I am very bad at X, Y, and Z, and I use this tool to support me being able to come across like a human being. And I think that it might be more challenging for me, or I might have a lot of like poor grammar if I don't use it. That's relatively thoughtful. Maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong. So like I said, this is important, but be cautious that you don't find your expectation only. So filter your resources. So there's so many things out there. There's so much information. There's so much noise. And so what this is talking about, this isn't terribly specific to the current information literacy assignment, but it does very much relate to any data-centered analysis. So the filter the resources, so consolidate your resources and remove extraneous data. You will often have in a professional setting a huge data set, a huge data array. And to answer the questions that you really need to look into, you might only need, let's say, 20% of it, maybe 30% of it. And by filtering it out and not looking at it, you make it easier for you to consume and see what's going on. So, and what that's really talking about in any sort of analytical piece is once you have determined what you're looking into, you can, at least for the moment, not look at some of the other stuff. So when I was doing that major report on Nike, the first thing that I looked at was I just looked at some of their 10Ks. And I saw that over the last 3 years, when I was doing this project, they had a gross margin that was going down. And at the same time, they had their sales going up, and by quite a large amount. And their gross margin was really going down. And I was like, that's weird. And obviously, them being a retail business and certain other things, the first thing that came to mind was maybe they have some weird inventory problems. And one of my buddies actually works for Nike in supply chain, and he actually had to relocate to Memphis because they were having some major inventory problems in that were like basically what they were doing was they were not well keeping track of their inventory that was like past date basically, and they were just storing it in random warehouses in Memphis, and no one really had line of sight on it. So they just had this like consistent inventory that was sitting there dragging their income statements and their financial statements down, and it was just sitting there. So I knew that as background. And so I was like, okay, this lines up with what I know, so I'm going to look into it. And as I researched more and more things, I actually found that that wasn't the most relevant question to pursue. And so I went in a different direction. All of that being said, when I went in that different direction, I was able to go and say, okay, this chunk of stuff is not worthwhile. I started looking at Nike's saturation in the millennial and younger market, their digital delivery, and then also their saturation in the Asian and African markets. And as a result of that, I was able to, from the things that I was consider, I was able to not really focus on what they were doing terribly much in America, because they already have huge market saturation here. And I was also able to not look at what they were doing necessarily in Europe. So I was able to not have to consider that. And so I was able to filter it out so that I wasn't overwhelmed and I could be a little bit more targeted and strategic. So analyze is use the resources that you've kind of consolidated down to investigate your question. Are there trends? What are they? Are there relationships? What are they? Right? So when you talk about the Google search, so you're going to look and see if you have a filter bubble. Okay. You're going to have some people do a different Google search on a certain topic. And so you're going to have yourself and a couple of other people do this search. And then you're going to kind of look at the results and see if you see relationships, right? So your resources there are going to be the filter bubble video. They're going to be the actual searches that people have done. They're also going to be the demographic data of the people that have done the searches for you. And then you're going to look and see, are there things that are related, right? So if you have, maybe 2 males and 2 females that are doing this search, and you see that the male group gets one result very clearly, and the female group gets a completely different result, but the same for both of them, or very similar, then that might be a relationship to look into and see if there's other things, right? So finding relationships or finding trends does not say that there's anything that we can assume ahead of time. We can have some suspicions, but this is just seeing how they relate. So the evaluate your results and your formulate your conclusions are very important in terms of they link very much. So evaluate the results. Were your initial expectations correct? So that shows some very real thinking in terms of, are you even checking yourself? That's very important. But also, it's okay to be wrong as long as you learn something, right? You could think that everyone is going to get the same result or a different result in your Google search, and that may not be the case. And that's okay as long as you have a broader understanding of why that transpired. One of the things that students in the past have freaked out over is, so they go into it and they expect to see a filter bubble. Maybe they will, maybe they won't, whatever. And so they have their different people do the search, and then they don't see a filter bubble, or they don't clearly see a filter bubble, and then they freak out. And they're like, this is not working. And I'm like, okay, well, is it? Because maybe everyone has the same demographic details that impact the search. So maybe it's not that you are or are not seeing a filter bubble. Maybe it's just that you didn't have enough difference to present things going into the search engine to get you a different output. So that's possible. It's also possible maybe you didn't have a Google search, or I'm sorry, you didn't have a filter bubble. And quite frankly, ever since the TED Talk came out, it's actually been something that Google is supposedly trying to work on and make sure that it doesn't exist. Now, in some cases, it still does. And in some cases, they're better, and that's fine. But on the off chance that you choose a search that is quote unquote better, in the sense that they've removed some of those bias elements, great. That doesn't mean that you've done anything wrong, but if you expect to see a filter bubble and then you don't, okay, well, what do you think made that happen, right? So how do you revisit your initial expectations and see if they were correct or weren't correct, and why? And I am a firm believer that this second bullet here is the most important thing, because that goes back to the report that I was referencing. So based on what you know in that kind of initial analysis, you've gathered your resources, you've seen the relationships and everything else, do you think your first question was the most relevant? Because at this point, in like a work setting or something else, you probably are in like couple days into doing a project, right? You've established a team, Samuel, Adriana, and I, we're going to work on something. We have a question. We've gathered some resources. We're going to start looking into stuff. We gather some initial information, and we have a meeting to see like, okay, what are we finding? Are we going to continue to look into this? And all of these other pieces. If you don't ask this question here, you stand the chance of doing a month of work on something that is actually not the most relevant question. So it's very important that once you have that initial data, once you have some of the analysis going, you go and say, okay, knowing what I know now, am I still confident that the initial question that I was pursuing is the most important? What question do I think is most important, and kind of start from the top. And it is better to do that than to just answer a question and put all that work in a question that you know is not valuable. It is very rare in any analytical situation that the first idea or the first question that you have is the best question. That is, if you are that person, then you will be very wealthy and good on you. But I know a lot of really smart people, and that is not the case. And a lot of them are very, very successful professionals. So the reality is you can have a good question, and in the process of investigating a good question, you can come up with a great or best question. And if you have horse blinders here, you run the risk of losing clarity on that quote unquote best question. And then formulate your conclusions. So based on your analysis and evaluation, what did you find? And another piece that's really important is what is relevant to your audience. So if we're bringing it back to the information literacy assignments, so all of the information literacy assignments, you should be tying those things to course concepts. You should be tying those things to your understanding of, I would say, whatever the bigger picture premise of that question in particular was, that assignment in particular was, and how does it demonstrate your understanding? Because this is an academic setting, right? So that is what matters to your audience. But it is important for you to ask that question of what is relevant to your audience. If Yelena is like a senior vice president, she's probably got like 3 minutes for me, right? So, right, yeah, exactly, right? And so if I'm giving the entire scope of all of the details of every last thing that I've done, she cares about the first 2 sentences, and then after that, she's like waiting to get to her next meeting. Yeah, right? No, straight up. So, so knowing your audience, knowing their motivations, and knowing the bandwidth and time that they have available to them is really crucial, And then communication is a kind of segue, comma, splice off of that. But how are you communicating it? What's the most effective way of doing that? How is it organized? What's your messaging? Things like that. So this was a kind of a tool that I made mostly because, like I was saying, a lot of students kind of struggled with the process flow. And I was realizing that the disconnect for me was, not that I was being a jerk, but I kind of felt similarly to some of the instructors where I was like, well, just go think analytically. But it's something that I realized after the fact and being self-reflective that I was like, oh yeah, I have 7+ years of professional research science, and then also 5 years of studying science before that, and then also a bunch of other analysis experience and everything else. And so it's just saying a word without someone having the background that I have doesn't necessarily mean that someone can do it. And so I wanted to give people a tool that at least gave some structure to the steps. So hopefully that gives you a little more guidance. Do we have any questions off of that for now? Or are we just going to do the class head nod? Going to do that a little bit? Yeah. Okay. No, that's good. I'll take what I can get, man. Okay. Cool. Okay. So now we're into a little bit of meat and a little bit of potatoes. So data and information. So these are 2 major pieces that we will talk about a lot in this class. And so first and foremost, data are specific, objective facts. They're easily structured, often quantified. They're easily captured and transferred. So a lot of times in a true data analysis situation, we talk about what is your source of truth. I know it sounds very robotic, but it literally is what we say. And that's important because I know, right? It's like, I'm not even like, it's just a thing. It's just a thing. But the reason why we say that is because there are so often that people make decisions or come to conclusions on things that they think are data and are not. Right? So think about how many times we've had conversations with people, like personally, professionally, socially, whatever, where like someone's like, no, I know this is true. And you're like, from what? From where? Like I'm not even like being a jerk. I'm just like, okay, like where exactly? Oh, I heard it. Oh, you heard it on the internet? Cool. Like, let's go one step deeper. Whereabouts did you hear it? Like, and perhaps where did they hear it from? It's actually one of the things that's like kind of very frustrating to me about the difference between a columnist and a reporter, where a lot of people will give their opinion in a news setting, and that is fine, but their opinion is them theoretically taking data and processing it themselves and then delivering that to you. But it has already gone through their mental filtration, and it is not data, right? And so if you don't have a line of sight on the data they used, you are completely trusting their interpretation. And maybe you trust it, maybe you don't, but it is just not data. So information is data endowed with relevance and purpose. So it is organized and interpreted. It's presented in context so that it can answer a question, support decision making. I hesitate with this just to say that it's not that information has to answer a question or support decision making, but it can. It often does, but something can be information and not necessarily be used to support decision making. So the recipient determines data versus information. And this is one thing that is kind of true-ish, but is becoming less true. So human mediation is necessary. We will be at a place in our lifetime where that is not necessarily the case. So when we talk about machine learning, when we talk about AI and a lot of other pieces involved in that category, I don't think in our lifetime machine learning will be at a place where it can process things as comprehensively as the human brain can, but it will be able to process some things fully on the level of what the human brain can. And so that processing would be the ability to convert data to information. So I would say one piece that's, kind of consistent here is data would perhaps be height, right? So I'm rather short. I'm below average in height. So the observation that I am below average in height would be information. That would be processing what my height is and perhaps comparing it to the average height in the United States. So my height as a static number of 5'7" is purely facts. That's just a thing. And it is unambiguously just there. But applying some sort of interpretation to that, applying some sort of comparison to that, is where you take data, you process it in some way, and now you have information. And we'll touch on that a little bit. So this is a very good example because I am very poor in speaking any foreign language. So the only things that really make sense to me on this page is, so we got real ingredients, high in protein, low in fat. That's great. Gonna go at Petco. Apparently they know that Francis is hungry. That's my dog. And then some pictures. I don't really recognize anybody on there, so not really going to be able to do much with that. Obviously BBC and news and things like that. So I would say, but all of what is on that page is data. All of the characters that are there that are a part of language, communication, all of those images, those are all data that then someone who actually knows how to speak Chinese can interpret that. right? So they're able to process the core data, those symbols. They're able to interpret what they mean. They're able to go through that process. And in doing that, they're able to convert the data that is, or are, because it's both plural and singular. But they're able to convert that data into information. Does that make sense? I think so far I've ummed less this week than last week, but I still need my shock collar. Okay, so there are a couple of different types of data. So self-reported data, so that's the kind of stuff that we fill out, for example. So you're going to set up a new account. You're going to set up an email or something, and you have to have your name, your address, maybe a reference email, phone number, kind of whatever the things that they have set up that you have to communicate to them. But this is something that we have told it. Like, we have manually gone and communicated whatever that data is to the system. So that is one type of data. I would say at this point, it is not the largest type of data that is out there. This next one is really large, or is it really a big piece? So transaction data. So that is what we do. And I also want to be very cautious with the transaction data, because me purchasing something on Amazon, for example, is a transaction. And objectively, that is a part of transaction data and everything else. But transactional data in this case does not just mean some sort of some sort of purchase that has gone on. Transaction data is also your browsing history. It's also your click history. When we talk about transactional data, we talk about the stuff that you have done that you didn't necessarily actively go to Amazon and say, oh, please collect all of the data on all of the things that I clicked on. Now, we may know that Amazon is doing that, but we are not necessarily actively telling them, like, please store the fact that I have been looking at flowing water cat things so that way my cats are more inclined to drink the water that I need them to drink. I didn't say that to Amazon, but now I get ads for the damn things. I've already made my purchase. I only wanted one, right? But so Amazon, in collecting that transaction data of the actual transaction that I made, but then also all of the different pieces that I did that were affiliated with the journey of me making a buying decision, that is also transactional data that goes into this web that Amazon has about me that says, this person clearly has 38 cats. I don't. And he clearly needs more cat water things. I don't. But that's just what they're doing with the transactional data. And the transactional data is definitely something that very much relates to both the information literacy assignments this week. So we're going to touch on that in just a second. So the last one is psychographic data. And that actually is something that is very much on the forefront of what people are trying to do with, kind of modern data analysis. So psychographic data is how we're feeling, maybe how we're going to act as a result of those feelings. So that's a little bit harder to quantify. That is a little bit harder to directly model. So one of the things, how many people have a fitness tracker? Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, I never did, and maybe it would have motivated me to exercise, sadly. But all of that being said, my sister and my mother are like 10,000 steps Nazis. Like, if they don't get their 10,000 steps in, like, my mom will literally, like, I will go to her house for dinner and she'll be walking around the house at like 8 o'clock at night. And I'm like, are you okay? Is everything good? Is like the house on fire? Are we good? And she's like, oh, I was only at 8,000 steps. And I was like, okay, it's not good, but I hear what you're saying. But so the thing is that those fitness trackers are tracking our heart rate. They're tracking our activity. They're tracking all of these other pieces. And so if that data is aggregated and they're able to correlate heart rate, okay, so when your heart rate is up, maybe you're more active or maybe you're more stressed, right? So at a certain point, maybe it's stress. At a certain point, maybe it's activity. Some of those other pieces. I actually use, for all of my criticism of my mother, I use a sleep tracker, which can be very, very good. Sleep hygiene is super, super important, and it's very important to me. So magic number, about 7. More than 7 is just unnecessary for me. Like if I get more than 7, I'm just like, all right. I literally don't feel any different. And if I get less than 7, I get really like verbally punchy. No one wants any part of that. So 7 is a real good sweet spot. But within that, like what is the productivity of that 7, right? It could be a wide variety of things. So I have this little tracker that says, like how much REM sleep you get and like where you started falling asleep and so on and so forth. Not that there's much I can do, but that might be something that my app, the sleep tracker app that I have, they could correlate that to maybe some other device, maybe some other app. Maybe link that data to something else. Like what's going on? Why, if I'm consistently going to bed at 11 o'clock, why am I up at midnight? Right? So, I mean, like there's all sorts of different directions that this collection of the data can go. And normally we're using it in the transactional sense. But because there are so many different ways to collect that data now, we have a little bit more ability for companies to be collecting data that is psychographic and can answer different questions. So one thing that I would say with that is like social media. One of actually, I don't remember if it was Instagram, but I know Facebook was talking about it, but was talking about taking away the like button. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And just like there's a lot of psychological studies on what that does to people. And so it's one of those pieces where some of those different elements of social media that then create a different ability to interpret or get to know that person. And obviously, from a business standpoint, if you can get really good data, no matter whether it's ethical or not, and we'll actually touch on this in this class quite a bit, but you can answer better questions. And that can lead to you being able to make different sales and accumulate different revenue streams. And so it's really important. I feel like the psychographic is really important that you have awareness of it, which is this a thing that we even want to collect, right? Is this even a thing that is ethical? And I would say that there are some within this that is totally okay. And then there are others that are very much like raise huge glaring red flags to me. And just being able to say like, is this even a thing that we should be collecting? Is this even a thing that we want a part of, right? So that is a very, I think, relevant thing that we will all be asking ourselves, certainly in the next 10 to 20 years, both socially and in the business world. So we're going to talk about, data exhaust, which is obviously important since we have an assignment entitled it. Data exhaust is the data created during the use of digital products and services, such as browsing history or location. Do me a solid. Do not say that data exhaust is when you're exhausted with data. I have indeed had assignments where that was what was delivered to me. You're not going to do so well if that's your answer for what data exhaust is. But data exhaust is really the trail of data that you leave based on what you do. So think about the fact that no one uses cash anymore, right? Except if you're going to a dispensary, really is probably the only time that you're using cash these days. Federal laws being federal laws, it's a thing. So that means that every purchase you make, there is a digital paper trail. Someone can track that. Now, even if you wanted to go one step away from that, right? So where are you going to get your money? ATM? That's certainly tracked. You go into the bank? That's certainly tracked, right? So it might be that in a digital sense, if you're using your card or if you're using mobile payment or something else, literally every transaction is tracked, time-stamped, and everything else. On the other hand, if you were to go to the bank and just take out $200 cash and that was what you used, there wouldn't necessarily be a record tying you to the transaction at Cafe Yum because I was hungry, right? But there wouldn't necessarily be something tying me in particular to that transaction that occurred. But there would be something tying me to the ATM where I got cash out yesterday. And then in 2 days, when I have to get cash again, they at least have the ability to say, oh, Tim spent $60 in these 2 days. So the data exhaust is just all of the different pieces of data that you leave as a trail behind you. And it exists. And it is, I would say, for the most part, completely unintentional in the sense that it is just like, it is like a byproduct of how we consume technology. So the more insidious one is function creep. So that is data collected for one purpose that is then used for another unintended and unrelated purpose. And this happens, sadly, quite a bit. And there are some data brokers and other related things that we'll talk about briefly today, where they are collecting data and then they are selling it to someone else without your consent and without your knowledge. And so the data that they collected is then used by someone else for something different. So imagine the self-reported data. So you go and you set up an account. You've communicated your email address, your address, your phone number. Okay, so you have an account with that entity, whoever, whatever it is. And imagine if they then sell that data, Gesundheit, to someone else, and they use it for a different purpose. When you reported it to that first company, you were reporting it for the purpose of, maybe you're giving it to Amazon and you're reporting it to them because you want an account and you want them to send stuff to your address. Like functionally, that is your intention in giving them that data. And then if they have gone and sold it to one of the companies that does ads on their platform, and they are giving that data to them specifically so that they can target us because we live in Portland. So we're going to get specific items that are either only in Portland or maybe only people that live in Portland have a high correlation of wanting those items, right? So now they have taken that data that we gave them for one specific purpose, give me stuff that I buy, and they have given it to someone else for a completely different purpose of them trying to sell us stuff that we don't want. So function creep happens all of the damn time. And I would say one of the things that's most important with these two things is just to be aware of it. So my rant against Facebook, but my pro Google thing, which may sound hypocritical, is Google delivers products to me that I use and I want. And I understand that Google probably knows more about me than all of every other thing in the world. But I'm okay with that because they give me some products that I use. And I'm not saying you have to be okay with it, but I'm just saying I personally am aware of it and I'm okay with it. And my annoyance with Facebook is Facebook tries to do the same thing in terms of collecting information or collecting data on me, and yet they don't give me a product that I care about until you start talking about Instagram, which I know Facebook owns, and then I get the memes and all of that, which is fine. But I'm just saying, like, Facebook as its own platform, I don't care about. So again, you just want to be aware of these things. So knowledge is the next level past data, then information, and then you get the knowledge. So knowledge has an added piece where you are taking the information and you are synthesizing and contextualizing it. So you have some information, and now you are taking either your skill set, maybe your professional skill set, you've done something for a long period of time, and you have subject matter knowledge that nobody else has, and you are applying that to the information to come to some strong conclusions. So taking information and really setting up conclusions, that transition is knowledge. And so aggregated and filtered through human experience, reflection, synthesis, context. It is hard to structure because it can often, as I was saying, because it is derived in many ways from your specific set of experiences and background. Samvel and I might come to the same conclusion, but we might go through a slightly different process, which means his knowledge base versus my knowledge base is going to be slightly different. And so the processing and the funneling of that information is going to be different. Now, it might get to the same endpoint, but the route is potentially different. And that's one of the reasons why it's very hard to structure. And like I said before, again, is technically true right now. And I just want to be very declarative that it is true right now, and it will become less true each and every day. So I think a lot of these pieces are actually very interesting because you can actually tell a little bit of the tradition that is how we've discussed this and how rapidly technology is changing right now, that this statement was very much true 2 years ago and is now mostly true. And 2 years from now will be slightly true, right? And so it's just like, that is, in fact, one of the main reasons why this class is so important. So, and then derived from experience and expertise. So I have 2 figures here that may help kind of show the process. So data, information, and knowledge. So data is just the raw facts. So you're driving along, and there is a red light. The light is red. The specific color that it is, you know, maybe whatever. So information is, what is the meaning of that red light? So it is a south-facing traffic light on Pitt and George Street has turned red. Okay, so that's you being able to look and be like, okay, this light, that light is red, and it is facing this way, and all of these other pieces. So knowledge is applying context to the meaning. So the traffic light I am driving towards has turned red. This is important. Perhaps I should stop, which is right up here. So oftentimes, especially because our brains process things so rapidly, with more trivial sort of questions, which often when we're talking about data, information, and knowledge, we're using a very low-level question to showcase it, we transition from information to knowledge very quickly. That isn't necessarily true all of the time, and that's the reason why it's important to understand that information is when you have applied meaning to the raw facts or raw data, and knowledge is when you put that meaning in context. And this other slide touches on that process that we've talked about. So data, we give it some context, we get information, and it's useful, organized, and structured. We give it meaning, and it becomes knowledge. It's contextualized, synthesized, it's learning. We give it insight, and it becomes wisdom. So again, those are 2 different figures. They're kind of saying the same thing, but it's just there to kind of hammer that home. And I would say the biggest piece to understand is we often talk about data, and we mean information or something else. We very rarely, as people, go to the very starting level of where those facts originate. And you want to be very careful with that. There are very much times where that is okay, but just understand what you actually are using as your starting interpretation and whether it has been filtered or processed already. And that's very important. So one thing that's really important, and I am actually going to have a couple of people do a small thing for me. So John, I want you, without telling anyone, to write, if you were evaluating a computer, so a laptop, whatever, what are the 5 things that are most important to you? I'm going to have you do the same thing. I'm going to have Carter do something. And then I will have you do that as well. So I will grab those from you in a second. But all I'm looking for is just the 5 things that if you were purchasing a laptop or a computer of some sort, the 5 things that are most important to you. So talking about data are collected in context. So what that means is when you are collecting data, you are making a choice. So you have already prioritized that those pieces are important to you. You have defined them as important by the fact that you are collecting them. So read databases. So that's just a traditional database. So what's included or excluded is really, really important. And so what is classified is defined by the person who sets it up. So think about the fact that for a long period of time, most places only specified gender as male and female. Even Portland State, which is seen as a rather progressive institution. And recently, but not as far back as you would think, they added another option, which is other. But even by saying other, what have they said, right? Like even by how they are choosing to gather the data about their student population, they are already showing their bias in how they perceive the question. Another one of those things is ethnicity. So if you have someone who is mixed ethnicity, there are often not a lot of great ways to communicate that on like a standard, like what is your ethnicity sort of thing. So Dr. Wagner, who's the undergraduate dean, her husband is North African descent, but he is of mixed race. And based on the kind of standard ethnicity options that you have available to you, the only thing he can put is Caucasian. And he is, if you were to look at him, you would not say he is of Caucasian descent. And that's not to say that he isn't partially, but it's just one of those things where it's like based on how we structure the question, based on how we structure the database, we are determining what is and isn't valuable. And we are determining what is and isn't collected. And actually, this is the reason why I am so passionate about data in a business sense, because based on how technology has transformed things, we can now collect data that we don't know we need. So if you think about this, when you say data is collected in context, it means that you are intentionally collecting some data, right? You have made a choice. These categories are important to me. I am going to collect them. Okay. But those are all you're collecting. And that is how we did it for so long in the past. Like you would go to your IT professionals in some sort of workplace and you'd be like, okay, we need to collect this data because it's going to support us figuring stuff out in marketing or whatever else. Great. But there's all this other stuff that you're not collecting because you only want this data because you know that this data answers the 2 questions that you have. So you have this huge blind spot to everything else because you don't care, right? And that's how it's been done for ages. That's been how it's been done for more than anyone's in this room's lifetime. But now that we have such ability with technology, we're able to actually collect more data, even the stuff that we don't necessarily consider is important, on the off chance it is relevant, right? So now we actually can do things differently than this. Rather than intentionally only collecting specific data, we can just like collect it all. Even in that sense, it's still in context because all we're doing is collecting everything we can think of, right? And how many things that are data points that we generate now are something that no one would have even thought of 10 years ago? Like we wouldn't even have been thinking about taking away the like feature on social media 10 years ago because it hadn't been introduced, right? So it's never going to be perfect, but I do think it's cool that we can break free of some of this by virtue of what technology makes available to us now. So, and we can reverse engineer. So by examining what is left out, we can start determining what those systems or what those enterprises or what those groups care about. Okay. So does anyone know what the DSM is? Okay. So the DSM is the diagnostic is it diagnostic manual of psychiatry? I don't know. I don't remember what it, yeah, I don't remember exactly what it stands for, but basically it's this huge tome. It's like maybe 1,000 pages, but, and I think they're on DSM-5 and I think they're working on DSM-6. But basically what it does is it determines what is a psychiatric disorder or not. So if you are going to go and get medical treatment for maybe go counseling, maybe get some medication or something else, if the symptoms that you are experiencing don't fall under something that's found in here, you are not eligible, right? So in and of itself, we create this very dangerous bias based on what we collect. So one example is the idea that bipolar disorder, bipolar 1 and bipolar 2, have been called over 30 different things in the last 50 years. And that in and of itself is kind of mind-blowing to me, just because it's like the symptoms have been the same. Like 50 years ago, they were taking these symptoms and they called it one thing, and then they were taking the symptoms, they called it something different. And so they were processing this piece very differently. Also, my girlfriend has an autoimmune condition, and an interesting thing about how they actually classify autoimmune conditions is they basically have like, I think it's like 20 or 25 different like symptoms that you might have. And if you have like 6 of these 10, you have MS. And if you have like 3 of these 5, you have rheumatoid arthritis. But it's like, but what if you have some of these and some of these? You have nothing? Like you clearly have something, but because they haven't defined it, you have nothing. And so how we collect the data and then how we classify the data is really, really important. And that in and of itself determines how things work. So internet gaming disorder and social media addiction are things that they've been talking about, but they aren't something that's fully covered and fully established. And there are plenty of stories of people that are, I mean, as addicted to either of those things as you would say you're addicted to anything else. And because they haven't fully made their way into this manual, because this group hasn't collected that data and validated it in a certain way, you're fine. Like you're just fine. What's wrong? Like, why is anything wrong? You're totally good. It's just, yeah. Well, there's that is a point, except that when you talk about like a medical diagnosis, it's not always talking about pills. It's talking about, so when I say you're fine, I guess what I mean is they are saying you do not have a medical condition that is therefore covered by your insurance, and therefore it is your responsibility to resolve on your own. So, and I am not necessarily saying, because this is slightly off topic, but I am not necessarily saying medicate everything. I am purely saying that by virtue of them taking the data that they have collected or not collected, and then classifying all of these different things, which is their data to information conversion, right? By virtue of doing all of that, they have decided what the eventual output is. And they have decided how this other group, medical practitioners, can then classify us. And as a result of that, there are people that are excluded based on things that we may find 10 or 20 years from now are indeed conditions, right? And I mean, the process has to be iterative. So I'm not saying that this inherently is a bad thing. I'm just saying it is one of the offshoots of how we go through and collect data, and what the collection of that data allows for interpretation, and then what that interpretation ends up doing as a result. So, but 100% correct. 100% correct in what you were saying, Jeff. Yeah. Okay, so real quickly, one last thing that we will do. Okay. I have to go out of the presentation, so bear with me. Okay, so John, we are going to say, so we're going to play a little game. So let's say we have 4 different representatives of different computer companies, right? And so you are going to collect certain data, right, to determine, is your product good or not good, right? Is it meeting market demand, right? So we're going to have you be Apple. And so what are the things that you were going to collect about computers? What was valuable?
Durability.
Okay.
Reliability. Speed. Cost. And features.
That's what I was afraid of. Said speed, said cost, and what else? Features. Got it. Okay. And then who else did I have? Okay, so we'll have you, who do you want to be as a computer maker? Okay, sure, you can be, yeah, Surface 7, Surface Pro 7, get it, it's good. Okay, so what did you have? Okay, sure, that's just as valid as anything else. Okay, Carter, you want to be Dell? Is that okay? Is that good? Yeah. Sure. I love the word aesthetics, but since I can't spell affordability, we're not going to have that. That's for damn sure. Yeah, that's true. That's accurate. I became a really bad typist in the last year. I was so good 2 summers ago, and then it's now my fingers aren't even connected to me. And then what company do you want to be? You want to be Google? You want to be Lenovo? I don't know. I don't know. What? IBM? Sure, IBM. Sure, great. Okay, what do you got? Okay. Sure. Okay. Price? Okay, sure. Sure. Okay, so those are all good things to look at. And obviously, it's hard to evaluate any product that you're going to spend $1,000 or $2,000 on by simply 5 categories. So this is more as an intellectual exercise. But let's think about, for a moment, the situation that we find ourselves in, which is, so we have Apple cares about reliability. They care about speed. But processor is not the only piece that's part of speed, right? Processor and memory are both involved. So maybe by simply saying speed, you lose some clarity on what your performance looks like. Maybe you lose some clarity on how to compare versus your other competition or what customers actually want. I can tell you that for a long period of time, I cared more about RAM. But once I started doing a lot of data visualization things, it actually matters more now for me how many cores my processor has, which I never would have thought of because I stopped gaming a long time ago. So it wasn't something that it was really on my line of sight, but it is very important, right? But so to me, speed means something very different than someone else, right? So durability was important for, I would say, pretty much everyone. I mean, we had different words for it, right? We didn't, let's see, did we care about cost? We cared about cost on Apple. Microsoft had all the money in the world, so they didn't care about that. It's fine. It's good. Dell also. Oh, no, Dell had affordability. Cool. Good. So, I mean, different pieces are going to lend themselves to different things, right? And based on what you choose to collect, you inherently have prioritized certain things. So like if we're just talking about Microsoft, so if Microsoft says that those 5 categories are the only things that matter, and then they're doing very well in those 5 categories, then they are like, man, we have the best product in the world. And then why is it not necessarily competing? I can tell you that they brought up the Surface last week, the Surface Pro 7, and I'm actually super stoked about it because they have well, not the the Duo, not the Neo, but the Duo, because the Duo is like a phone. But the main reason why I was excited about that is I've had a Surface forever, and the biggest blind spot of the Surface is their app store is garbage. It is beyond garbage. And so like the Duo actually is going to allow you to have all of, theoretically, we'll see what the product ends up delivering on, but theoretically, it's going to give me all of the features of a small tablet-sized Surface, but let me have access to the Android store. Now, the Android store is certainly not as good as the App Store for Apple, but is much more robust than the Windows App Store, which might as well be just a joke, right? And so, but the point is that like if you were Microsoft and you weren't looking at applications and other pieces, you could think that everything you're delivering is awesome and have a complete blind spot, right? So the data that you're collecting, the data that you're choosing to collect, biases what questions you can answer and what conclusions you can come to. Cool. So I think that's as good of a stopping point. So please, one thing, at least be aware of what the information literacy 2 assignments are by Wednesday. I'm happy to talk about them and answer some questions, but I can't really answer questions if you don't have them. All right, awesome. Have a good start to your week, guys.